Today, we're going to try and solve a huge mystery. How much is a piece of property actually worth? I mean, it's a question that affects billions of dollars every single day. The person who has to crack that case is the appraiser. So let's open up their toolkit and see how they do it. So let's just start right there with the big question. You might think, well, a house is worth whatever someone's willing to pay for it, right? And, that's part of it. But there's a whole professional process behind the scenes, a really rigorous one, that's designed to get to an objective, solid number. It's way less about a gut feeling and a whole lot more about a methodical investigation. In that professional process, that's what we call an appraisal. Seriously, just think of it like a formal investigation. The appraiser, they're the lead detective, and they have this set of really specialized tools and methods they use to uncover all the evidence and pinpoint that final value. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to look at the three main tools an appraiser uses. That's the comparison, the cost, and the income approaches. And then we'll see how they put all those clues together to land on that final super important number.
Okay, first up is the most common tool in the whole toolkit, especially if you're talking about a house or a condo. This is the comparison approach. And honestly, the logic here is pretty simple, pretty intuitive. If you want to figure out what one house is worth, you just look at what similar houses nearby have sold for recently. Those are your first and probably your most important clues.
But here's the catch, right? No two houses are ever exactly the same. So the real magic is in something called the adjustment process. An appraiser takes a recently sold home, they call it a comp, and they basically tweak its price on paper to make it a perfect match for the house they are appraising. If your house has a cool feature the comp doesn't, boom, you add value. If the comp has something yours is missing, you subtract value. The whole point is to get to a true apples-to-apples comparison. Okay, let's make this real. Imagine your house and the comp are almost identical. Same beds, same baths. But the comp has a two-car garage, and your house doesn't. The appraiser is going to subtract the value of that garage from the comp sale price. But hold on, your house has a brand new deck that the comp doesn't have, so they'll add the value of that deck right back in. It's this little dance of pluses and minuses over and over again for a few different comps until they get a final adjusted value.
So why is this method so popular? Well, for one, the data on sold homes is usually pretty easy to find. Plus, it's the most direct reflection of what buyers are actually paying in the market right now. The downside, you absolutely need a good number of recent similar sales to pull from. If the market's going crazy or if you've got a really unique property, this method starts to get a little shaky. All right, let's switch gears and grab the second tool from the toolkit. This one gives us a totally different picture. It's called the cost approach. And here, the appraiser asks a completely different question. Forget what other houses sold for. What would it cost to buy this empty piece of land and build this exact same structure from scratch, right now, today? The process here is basically a four-step recipe. First, the appraiser figures out the value of the land all by itself, as if it were just an empty lot. Second, they calculate the total cost of all the materials and labor it would take to build the structure today. Third, and this step is so important, they subtract value for any depreciation. And finally, they add that land value back to the depreciated building value, and that gives you the total.
So what in the world is depreciation? Well, it's not just physical wear and tear, like a leaky roof. It can also be what we call functional, like a really awkward floor plan that's just totally out of style now. Or it can even be economic, which is caused by stuff happening outside the property itself, like a noisy new highway getting built right next door. Figuring this out is honestly one of the trickiest parts of an appraiser's job. So when is this approach the star of the show? It is fantastic for brand new construction because there's basically no depreciation to worry about. It's also the go-to method for really unique public buildings, like a school or a church. I mean, you're not going to find any comps for those, right? The big challenge, as you probably guessed, is that calculating that depreciation on older buildings can get really difficult and, frankly, pretty subjective. On to the third and final tool in the kit, the income approach. And this one is all about the money. This method is almost exclusively for investment properties. Think apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers. It basically ignores comps and construction costs and focuses on one single question. How much money does this property generate? Now, a super simple way to wrap your head around this is with something called the gross rent multiplier, or GRM. Think of this as a quick back-of-the-napkin calculation. An appraiser will figure out a typical multiplier for a certain neighborhood, multiply it by the property's total monthly rent, and that spits out a rough estimate of its value. It's not a full-blown appraisal, but it perfectly shows the core logic. The value is just a multiple of the income.
You can see why an investor would love this method, right? It directly connects the property's value to its ability to make them money. But it definitely has its challenges. Trying to accurately guess future expenses or how often apartments will be vacant, that's tough. And choosing the right capitalization rate, which is kind of like a more complex version of the GRM, takes a ton of data and real expertise. Okay, so our detective work is done. The appraiser might have up to 3 different values from 3 completely different methods, one based on sales, one based on cost, and one based on income. But the job is not over yet. Now comes the final, and I'd argue most crucial step, putting it all together. This final step is called reconciliation. And look, if you take away one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. Reconciliation is not about just averaging the 3 numbers. That's a huge misconception. It's an art. It's about the appraiser using their experience and their professional judgment to decide which of those methods is giving the most reliable, the most believable indicator of value for that specific property.
So how do they weigh the evidence? Well, it's all about the context of the property. For a typical single-family home in a regular neighborhood, the comparison approach is king. It's going to get almost all the weight. For a brand new custom-built mansion or a public library, the cost approach is probably your most reliable bet. And for a 50-unit apartment building, you better believe the appraiser's going to lean almost entirely on that income approach.
And that brings us to the end of the investigation. The final appraisal report, it isn't just a number on a page. It's the whole case file. It's all the evidence, the methods they used, the reasoning behind their decisions, and all the documentation that supports their final conclusion of value. Case closed. Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. After all of that data, all the adjustments, and all the calculations, is that final number a cold, hard fact? Or is it the most educated, well-supported, and defensible opinion that an expert can possibly give? It's that fascinating blend of science and art that really makes you think, doesn't it?